Hey there, guys. So, I had a special guest planned for this week's episode, but they unfortunately were not able to do this episode. So, this week it's just me by myself, unfortunately. But I hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At the Movies with William Fletcher. As per usual, I am your host, William Fletcher, and this week as I mentioned in the intro before, I had someone planned to do this episode with, but they unfortunately could not do it. So it's just me this week, and we'll be talking about Hocus Pocus in anticipation. Well, not really anticipation, more just I needed an episode to fill this week. And I noticed there was a new one coming out, so I figured I might as well do this. But yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm just going to be sort of straight up and honest. I don't particularly care for this film. If I'm being completely honest, I don't think it's that amazing. It's just sort of like it's a movie, and it's fine, but it's like I'm not that bothered about it. It is just a movie that exists. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about it a little bit, and then yeah, I'll wrap up and we can move on. And yeah, so this film is this is one of those films I feel like if I'd seen as a child, I'd probably like it a lot more, but I hadn't seen it, so I don't like it. I don't particularly care for it. I think this film really doesn't work on a lot of levels for me. To sort of be positive about the film briefly, I think it's put together competently enough in terms of like editing and that. The cinematography is perfectly fine. Like there's not a whole lot going on with it that I particularly think is great. The film just sort of overall, like I think most of the makeup and costumes are all pretty decent for the most part. None of it's great, none of it's revolutionary. Fine, I just don't think this film really has a whole lot in it for me, especially not a lot that I'm particularly invested in. I think sort of performance wise, it's not really doing anything great. I don't think the performances are particularly interesting or anything. I don't particularly like any of the characters, if I'm being sort of completely honest. I think a lot of the characters just sort of don't work that well. I think the protagonist he's not a very interesting character, honestly. I think the witches who are sort of the draw to this film, and then sort of the reason why I have to imagine that's probably why a lot of people love this film is those three witches, and I can't say they did a lot for me. I just didn't they weren't funny or interesting or entertaining, or they didn't have anything for me that really got me interested or invested or want to see them. Like, I think the only part that involved them that I kind of liked was when I think it's Sarah Jessica Parker's witch, and she's on the broom and she's sort of like singing to like the children or some crap. Like, she's in the air and she's singing, and the children are like bewitched by her voice or something. Like, that was the only part of the film that I thought, like, with the witches, that I was like, that's actually not too bad. But like just besides that, I didn't even think they had good interplay between each other. They just sort of were characters, and they had their they would just sort of had things. They sort of talked and they argued and they hit each other and everything, but they didn't. And also, like, I know they're meant, like, witches are not meant to be good looking, and they're meant to be ugly, but it kind of felt weird though that Bette Midler, I think she's the main one, looked, she was sort of made unattractive looking. She had the big teeth and all that crap, and she sort of did. But then Sarah Jessica Parker's witch is quite attractive. It felt. I don't know if it's just because she was, that attractive then, or I don't know. It just feels weird that these witches are meant to be ugly, and then like two of them are not. That two of them are ugly, and then one of them is just really good looking. Like it doesn't. It feels weird, and I don't know if it's because they couldn't work around Sarah Jessica Parker what she looks like, but it just felt weird, and I didn't. It just didn't really work. But putting the witches aside, the sort of big standout characters, quote unquote, I just felt in general the characters weren't particularly investing. I thought the main guy was super bland and just not interesting in any way. His like sister was just not. I mean, kid actors. I've touched on this before, but kid actors are crap a lot of the time. It's very. I could think of like a handful of really really great child performances. Then there's some pretty solid ones, and then there's just a lot of terrible ones that drag films down. And this film just doesn't have any in like well written child characters or any good actors doing it, because I think like even if they weren't the greatest written, I think you could still get a good performance out of them. It just would be the writing that would be bollocks and shite, and that would screw with the characters. I think that would probably be that could be something that the characters aren't they're very much archetypes, but they're not. Like I think you could have an archetypal character, but they could still be played very well. And I think this film just doesn't have any of that. The sort of the sort of other female sidekick, this girl that the main guy has a thing for, is just like, again, just not very interesting. I didn't care for the cat, which is weird because I feel like I should care for a cat, but maybe it's because it's just, if it was like just a regular cat, I'd probably like it more, but because it's a guy um, who I have no investment in and I have no interest in, and I genuinely could not care less about what happens to him. Honestly, I think like the ending, skipping ahead, when he becomes human again. Well, he doesn't become human again. He just dies, and then he becomes a fucking spirit or whatever. I was like, I mean, sure, it's nice and everything, but I just don't care really. I was more sad because I just had the visual of a dead cat, and that got me more than the whole him actually being dead. But yeah, just the other side supporting characters just didn't work for me, and I just did not care for anything in terms of the characters. I did not really have an interest in what was happening, what was gonna be done with it, honestly. But yeah, so yeah, the film, yeah, it has the sort of the stuff. But yeah, the three witches they introduced straight up, and I kind of thought, oh, they were like the main characters, we were following them, and I was like, but that's very weird that we're following the witches because they're bad people. They're doing bad things, they're wanting to drain the life out of a little girl, and then they turn this guy into a cat, and they do all these things, and I'm just kind of like, why should I care? Like, why should I? Why am I meant to be invested in the story? Is the question, because that was one of the problems I had with the film. Is I was like, I had no idea. Like, I knew what I meant was supposed to be invested in, and I sort of knew that I was meant to care about all this crap. But it was just like, I don't understand, like, it like had all these things, it had all these elements for potentially a potentially good story if they did it properly and they actually took the time to write a decent script. Because that's the problem, really. I think the scripting is the problem with this film. I think, like, if the script wasn't nearly as weak, the film probably wouldn't be. I probably would like the film more, but like, I can't, I just don't get invested in the story and the characters, and I have no real interest in whatever the hell is happening. I watch the film, and there's all these sort of things, and I'm meant to be invested in this little girl so she doesn't get the life drained out of her by these witches, but like I just have no. Yeah, I just can't be. I'm just not invested, but because the characters are so weak and poorly defined and not well written that I just have no investment in the story, and I just don't have a real interest in whatever may happen because it doesn't. I'm not interested in these characters and the plight that these characters go through. Like, I don't care about the guy who was turned into a cat. He's introduced at the beginning of the film with like no character development whatsoever. There's just nothing about him, and then he becomes a cat. And I'm like, cool. And then he starts talking later on. I'm like, oh, that's really weird. And I think that would have been far more effective and possibly even more creative and kind of a bit more scary and kind of a bit more dark if the cat couldn't speak and he had to find other ways to communicate. Like, I think that would have been much easier and could have created more drama out of it. But I think the writers just took the easy way out. I'm like, oh, no, there's a cat who also can talk like a human. Like, I just don't. Like if the cat was spelling things out, like knocking things over or jumping onto things to help guide the people's attention to a different spot, something like that. Like I think that could have been a lot better. I think now that I'm talking about it, now that I'm thinking, I think this really could have worked if that's what they had done. But they didn't. They just went for the easy way out. Before I move on and talk a bit more about the film. This was directed by Kenny Ortega, who I don't think is amazing, but he's very much a director whose films are beloved by children and people who grew up watching his films. Like I last year I watched two of the High School Musical movies, and I mean like they're fine. I don't think they are that interesting or have anything really great going on with them. I would genuinely argue that there isn't a whole lot great in his films. Like I don't think like this film Hocus Pocus is his weakest film to date of the three I've seen. I've seen this one and High School Musical 1 and 2. And those two films are at least interesting and the characters are decent, not amazing, but decent characters. And this film fails in that department. I think, like in terms of writing, I don't think it really works. The film uses the phrase "hocus pocus" multiple times. Like there's a bit early on in the film where they go to this cabin and the guy's talking about how he doesn't believe in the witches and how it's all hocus pocus. It's like, oh, what the fuck? Like that's such a I hate films that insert the title into the film when it's not justified. Like if a film's named or a TV show is named after a character, or it's a catchphrase, or it's a company, or it's like something to do with the film in terms of like it's something that they're after, or it's characters like Batman, this film just sort of in general doesn't work, I think. Oh, and there's also those two bullies who we meet, who's in the films at several points they're on early on, and they bully the new kid and they take his trainers because these kinds of films always need the stereotypical bullies who just, because we need those bullies who make the character feel bad, and then he gets revenge on them later, and it's like, well, and the revenge he gets on these two later is he leaves them both in cages. Like that's not heroic. That's really horrible. And I think we're meant to, as an audience, be like, haha, that's funny. They bullied him before, now he's leaving him in a cage. Ha 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 ha. It's like that's not funny. That's just really horrible and shitty. And fuck that guy. Like it's not. I can't because I know. And there's probably there's maybe the argument that like, oh, this is a kids' film. You're meant to not taking it seriously. And it's like, I don't think that's a good justification. Like, I think saying that you shouldn't take a film as seriously or give it more labor because it's a kid film is a cop-out answer, and that's a bunch of crap. It's like, why why should a kids film be held to a different standard than a film made for older people? Like, I don't think that's fair, because I think criticism of film, and the way we judge films shouldn't be based upon the fact of what the target demographic is. It should be purely based on the merit of what the film is, of what it is attempting to do, of what it is achieving, of what it is saying, of what it is portraying on screen, of what kind of story it's telling. I think trying to say that criticism towards the film is not valid, or I should be more lenient, or I should be less harsh in a film because it's a children's film, is a bunch of crap, and I think that's really dumb. And I think it's unfair, and I think it's an easy way for people who make bad kids films to get out of criticism, and to avoid any real, and to just keep what they're doing, because, like, oh, it's just kids films, you don't have to take it seriously, they don't have to, they don't have to make it in the same way they do a film for adults. And I think that's really insulting, and I think that's quite, I just don't think that's a good way, a good mentality, or a good way of approaching it, of trying to say that, like, kids films are lesser than, so you don't need to put as much effort into. I don't think that's true at all. I think kids films are truly capable of some incredible things. Like, some of my favorite films of all times are effectively kids films. Like, I don't think, like, animation as a medium a lot of the time is considered to be for kids, and I don't think that it should be treated as such, but it is. And I think some of those films are some of the best films ever made, honestly. And this film is not. This is one of those films that I don't have an investment in, and I think a lot of people love because of childhood nostalgia. And it's like, I'm not immune to nostalgia. There are films that I know I love that are probably not as good. Like, I'm a big fan of Goonies, because I will rewatch Goonies at some point in the future. But I imagine it's probably not as good as I remember. And this is one of those films that people love and rave about, and talk about how great it is and how it's one of their favorite films. And it's like, well, it's because you saw it as a kid, and you can't. And I don't know if they can separate. They can be like, you can enjoy a film still, but you have to admit that it's not as good as you remember it being. There's certain films from my childhood that I've watched recently, and they still hold up very, very well. Like Nightmare Before Christmas, for example. That's a childhood favorite of mine. It holds up. It's still an amazing film. The Lion King, a lot of Disney and Pixar films I saw a lot when I was younger, but they still hold up because they've got there's so much great stuff in those films. They've got great characters and writing and story, and it looks really good because animation is great. But this film doesn't have anything good to try and justify its existence. I don't think it's really saying a whole lot. It's more just like, it's not doing anything that I would personally say is amazing, honestly. It's like, it's fine, I guess, but I don't. This is a film that I will possibly watch at some point in the future, but not for at least 10 years or so. Like, I have no interest in seeing this film again, because it just doesn't. Again, scripting is a big deal for me, and if the script isn't good, then it's hard for me to enjoy a lot of other things. The characters as well, to sort of go back to the characters, is the intelligence of certain characters fluctuates depending on what the story requires. Like, if they suddenly need the witches to do something clever to get out of it, then boom, there's a dance number, so people don't think they're witches. Oh, but now they attacked this boombox because they thought it was, real people or whatever it is. It's like, that's just bad writing. That is an example of poor writing, and it's just trying to get, the film is trying to get to this certain point, but it's by in doing so, it's sacrificing actual characters, and actual storytelling, and actual quality writing, and that sucks. This film is not that great. Like, it just doesn't work. And I think also I hate the whole fake out death it does of the witches. That they're killed, and I'm like, there's like still 30 minutes left of the film, so they're probably not dead, or maybe there's just some really really long credits or something. But no, they just don't kill them, and then the witches are brought back or whatever, and it's just kind of like, but why? Like, why would you do that? Like, what? How? Like, why am I? Like, why should I be invested then if the witches are killed, but then they're brought back? It's same with the cat. The cat gets run over by a bus, and I'm like, oh, well, that sucks. And then he just gets back up and he's like, no, I'm immortal. And it's like, well, why the fuck should I care then? If I have no, there's no tension there because he's an immortal character. And that's why writing characters like that who are immortal and can't die is a pain, and you shouldn't do it, I don't think, because it basically is like, it removes any and all tension from a film, because it's like, well, I know they're not going to die. I'm not, worried about them because they're gonna survive, and I just don't care. And I think, this film, like, just I didn't care. It's my real takeaway from this film. I was not invested in what was happening. I did not have any real interest in the characters. There was no tension. I wasn't worried about anyone. I didn't feel scared. I didn't laugh. I just didn't like this film that much. It just doesn't do a whole lot for me, and I would argue that people who love it saw it when they were younger and don't realize that it's not that great. But yeah, so I'm giving this film a 5 out of 10. Very weak 5. It might even be a 4, but I've got it down as a 5 right now. And yeah, I'm doing this film to tie into the sequel, Hocus Pocus 2, which comes out this week, which I will see. And I'm going to just sort of say right now, the review of the year episode that I will put out at the end of this year will be basically, there's going to be a format change to it, and it's going to be a bit different. So you will hear more, basically, I'm just going to put this out there right now. The review of the year episode will just be talking about the films I was tying episodes into. So I will talk about this in the what films I watched. I will be talking about Hocus Pocus 2 in the what films I watched this month, at the end of this week for the 1st of October. But I won't give as much detail in it. I know I will talk about it more in the review of the year episode, which will be the final episode of this year, and that's where I'll also be talking about, Doctor Strange 2, and Thor Love and Thunder, and Top Gun Maverick, all those sorts of films. I'll be talking about all of those at the end of the year. So, but that's, in like 3 months. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I did have, as I mentioned before, I had a special guest planned, but they unfortunately were not available to do it. But they are still interested in doing the show, so I'll have them on at some point in the future. And I am currently planning on recording soon an episode that will come out, not this month, it will come out next month. It's just, I'll have to record it this month because of schedules and everything, with a really special guest that I've been talking to for a while now. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. Check out all the previous ones, check out the social media things, and I will see all of you guys in the next one. Goodbye.